You could hear her before you saw her. The pop of grease in a cast iron skillet, the scrape of a wooden spoon across the bottom of a pot, the low hum of a hymn she never finished. Saturday morning in a black grandmother's kitchen was not a meal. It was a ceremony, and not one part of it came from a book. Number 14 turned a breakfast skillet into something that ate like Sunday supper. Number 8 was built from scraps most kitchens threw away, and number 3 was never cooked that morning at all. The food industry moved on. The cookbooks never included these meals, but the women who made them never forgot. Hit subscribe because these are the meals worth remembering. Here are 25 Saturday morning breakfasts Black grandmothers cooked from memory. Number 25, scratch hotcakes. There was no box of pancake mix in that kitchen. There was flour in a tin, an egg from the coop or the corner store, and buttermilk that had been sitting since Thursday. She poured it all into a bowl without measuring and stirred until it looked right. The batter was thicker than anything you will find in a diner. The hotcakes came out small, golden, and slightly crispy at the edges. They were served stacked with butter melting down the sides and cane syrup poured so heavy it pooled on the plate. A child could eat 4 of them and still ask for more. Nobody called them pancakes. They were hotcakes, and the recipe was in her hands, not on any card. Number 24, fatback and eggs. A slab of salt-cured pork fat went into the skillet first, sliced thin, and fried until the edges curled and turned glassy. The grease it left behind was the cooking medium for everything else that morning. Eggs cracked into that hot fat came out with lacy brown edges, the whites bubbled and crisp, the yolk still soft enough to break with a piece of bread. Fatback was not bacon. It was cheaper, saltier, and more honest about what it was. A piece of the hog that cost almost nothing and gave a breakfast more flavor than most seasoning shelves could manage. Doctors would later call it dangerous. Grandmothers who ate it into their 80s did not ask for a second opinion. Number 23, sop and syrup. This was ribbon cane syrup and butter melted together in a saucer until they turned into something halfway between a sauce and a confession. You tore a biscuit in half, pressed the soft side into the pool, and ate it before it dripped. Some families used sorghum instead. Some used blackstrap molasses, but the method was the same. There was no recipe. You watched someone do it, and then you did it yourself. Children fought over the last swipe of the saucer. It was dessert and breakfast, and comfort rolled into one. The sugar industry would later spend billions trying to replicate what a grandmother could make with 2 ingredients in 30 seconds. Number 22, stewed tomatoes and rice. Fresh tomatoes or a can of whole tomatoes broken up by hand in a pot with butter, sugar, salt, and torn pieces of white bread or leftover biscuit. Cooked down until the bread dissolved and the tomatoes turned into a thick, sweet, tangy stew. Spooned over a mound of white rice in a deep bowl and eaten with a spoon. Stewed tomatoes were a breakfast that confused people who did not grow up with them. Sweet and savory at the same time, warm and soft, closer to a porridge than a side dish. The sugar was not optional. Without it, the acid of the tomatoes overwhelmed everything. With it, the whole bowl turned into something gentle, the kind of food a grandmother served when the morning was slow and the kitchen was warm. Children who grew up eating it never lost the taste. Number 21, hoe cake. Nothing but cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, mixed into a batter thin enough to pour but thick enough to hold its shape in the pan. A spoonful of lard or bacon grease went into a hot skillet, and the batter spread into a flat round the size of a hand, fried on both sides until the edges turned brown and crisp, and the center stayed dense and chewy. The name went back to the fields, where enslaved workers cooked the same batter on the flat blade of a garden hoe held over open coals. The method moved indoors, but the name stayed. By Saturday morning, the hoe cake sat on the plate next to eggs and syrup, doing the same job a biscuit did, but with less work and fewer ingredients. A grandmother who made hoe cakes did not think of them as simple. She thought of them as fast, reliable, and exactly what a crowded morning needed before the biscuits went in. Number 20, tomato gravy, bacon or side meat fried first, pulled from the skillet and the grease left behind. A spoonful of flour stirred into the hot fat until it turned golden and started to smell like toast. Then a can of tomatoes, broken up by hand, poured in and stirred until the flour thickened everything into a rough pinkish red gravy dotted with tomato pieces. Poured over a split biscuit, it was tangy, salty, and rich from the pork fat that held it all together. Tomato gravy was not red-eye gravy. Red-eye was thin, dark, and bitter from coffee. Tomato gravy was thick, sweet from the fruit, and heavy enough to make a biscuit into a meal by itself. It was the gravy a grandmother made when the milk was running low and the pantry had canned tomatoes and not much else. Number 19, sugared rice. Leftover white rice from the night before, heated in a pot with a pour of canned milk, a lump of butter, and sugar stirred in until it dissolved, served warm in a bowl, eaten with a spoon. It was closer to a pudding than a proper breakfast, and children loved it for exactly that reason. There was no recipe. The sweetness depended on who was cooking and who was eating. A grandmother making sugared rice for a small child added more. For a grown man heading out the door, less. The rice was already cooked, so the whole thing took 5 minutes. It was what happened when there was nothing else in the kitchen but yesterday's rice and the will to make it into something worth sitting down for. Number 18, streak o' lean. This was smoked side meat cut from the belly of the hog, cured in salt and smoke and sliced thick. It went into a cold skillet and cooked slow until the fat rendered out and the lean streaks turned brown and firm, and the whole piece shrank down to something you could hold between two fingers. It was saltier than bacon and twice as smoky. The slices came out stiff and almost brittle, shatteringly crisp at the edges. Eaten alongside eggs or crumbled over grits, streak o' lean was breakfast meat that cost less than bacon and lasted longer in the smokehouse. A grandmother bought it by the slab, wrapped in butcher paper, and sliced it herself at the counter. Every cut was a different thickness because she measured by eye, not by ruler. Number 17, cornbread crumbled in buttermilk. This was not cooked on Saturday morning. It was assembled, cold cornbread from the night before, broken into chunks by hand and dropped into a tall glass of cold buttermilk. Eaten with a spoon, standing at the counter or sitting at the table, it was breakfast that required no heat, no skillet, and no time at all. The buttermilk softened the cornbread just enough to make it creamy at the edges, while the center stayed coarse and crumbly. The tang of the buttermilk against the sweetness of the corn made a combination that tasted better than either one alone. Some ate it with a raw green onion on the side, biting the onion between spoonfuls. A grandmother who ate cornbread and buttermilk usually ate it alone before the rest of the house woke up. It was her breakfast, not theirs. The children got the hot food. Number 16, liver pudding. Pork liver and pork scraps, ground together with cornmeal, sage, salt, and black pepper, packed into a loaf pan and cooked until it set firm. Sliced cold from the pan and fried in a hot skillet until a dark crust formed on both sides, while the inside stayed soft and dense and faintly grainy from the cornmeal. It showed up on breakfast plates across the Carolinas and parts of Virginia and Georgia, sliced thick and served next to eggs and grits. The flavor was earthy and deep, closer to sausage than to liver because the cornmeal and spices did most of the talking. Children who grew up eating liver pudding did not know they were eating liver until somebody told them years later. By then, it was too late to stop liking it. Number 15, breakfast pork chops. Thin-cut pork chops, seasoned with salt and pepper and sometimes a shake of garlic powder, dredged in flour and fried in a hot cast iron skillet until the crust turned dark golden and the meat cooked through but stayed tender. Served alongside eggs and grits, the pork chop took up half the plate and anchored the whole meal. These were not dinner cuts reheated. These were thin chops bought specifically for the morning, cheaper than the thick ones, quick to cook, and satisfying in a way that bacon alone could not match. A grandmother who fried pork chops on Saturday morning was making a statement. This was not a rushed day. This was a meal you sat down for. The grease from the chops went into the pan for the eggs. The eggs picked up the pork flavor. Everything on the plate talked to everything else. Saturday morning was different. On a weekday, breakfast was fast. Grits heated from the night before, a piece of bread, maybe nothing at all. Children had school. Adults had work or chores that would not wait. There was no time to stand at a stove, but Saturday was the one morning the kitchen opened up. The skillet came out early. The radio played low. The house smelled like food before anyone was fully awake. A grandmother did not cook Saturday breakfast because it was special. She cooked it because it was the only morning she could. And in that window, she passed down everything she knew, not with instructions, but with presence. A child standing at her elbow learned more about cooking in those 2 hours than a semester in any culinary school could teach. The kitchen was the classroom, the meal was the lesson, and nobody took notes. Number 14, smothered sausage and onions. Pork sausage, links, or patties, browned in a skillet until the casing split and the fat rendered out, then lifted from the pan and set aside. Into the drippings went thick slices of yellow onion, stirred and cooked low until they turned soft, translucent, and sweet. A spoonful of flour went in next, stirred into the fat until it darkened slightly, and then water or a little broth, enough to make a gravy that thickened around the onions and pulled everything together. The sausage went back in and simmered until the whole pan became one thing instead of separate parts. Spooned over rice or a split biscuit, smothered sausage was breakfast that ate like dinner. The onions melted into the gravy. The sausage gave up its seasoning to the sauce. The flour held it all together in a way that felt substantial and warm, even on a cool morning. Smothering was a technique that ran through every meal in a Black Southern kitchen. Smothered chicken for Sunday, smothered pork chops for Wednesday, and smothered sausage for Saturday morning, because even breakfast deserved the same care as supper. A grandmother who smothered sausage was not trying to impress anyone. She was applying the same method she used for everything else, because she only knew one way to cook, and that way involved patience, low heat, and onions. The gravy left in the pan after the sausage was gone was worth sopping with the last piece of bread. Nobody left it behind. And nobody asked for the recipe because there was no recipe. There was a skillet, there was onion, there was sausage, and there was a woman who knew when the flour had cooked long enough by the way the kitchen smelled. Number 13, sardines and crackers. A flat tin of sardines packed in oil or mustard sauce, opened with the key that peeled back the lid, set right on the table next to a sleeve of saltine crackers. That was the whole preparation. A sardine lifted out with a fork, laid across a cracker, eaten in 2 bites. This was a breakfast that came together in less than a minute and required nothing from the stove. A grandmother who put sardines on the table on Saturday morning was not cutting corners. She was managing a kitchen where 4 burners were already occupied with grits, eggs, meat, and biscuits. The sardines fed whoever was hungry right now while the rest of the meal finished cooking. The tin sat open on the counter until it was empty. Nobody put sardines on a plate. The tin was the plate, the cracker was the utensil, and breakfast was already happening before the biscuits came out of the oven. Number 12, oatmeal with canned milk, not instant oats, not the kind in a packet with freeze-dried fruit. This was the long cooking oatmeal, the kind that stuck to the spoon and stuck to your ribs and took patience to do right. It cooked on the stove for 20 minutes or more, stirred occasionally so it did not scorch on the bottom, served in a deep bowl with a pour of a pet milk or carnation, a lump of butter, and sugar stirred in until it dissolved. The canned milk gave it a richness that regular milk could not match, something almost caramel in flavor when it hit the hot oats. This was not health food. This was a grandmother making sure you were not hungry until dinner. That was her version of nutrition. Number 11, egg bread, a slice of white bread with a hole torn or cut out of the center, placed flat in a greased skillet, and an egg cracked directly into the opening. The bread fried on one side, then the whole thing was flipped carefully, the egg cooking inside its frame until the white set and the yolk stayed soft. Some called it toad in a hole, some called it egg in a basket. Most called it nothing at all because it did not need a name. It was what happened when there were 2 eggs and 4 children and a grandmother who could make mathematics work on a plate. 1 egg became a full piece of toast, a protein, and a meal that felt complete, even though it came from almost nothing. It was engineering disguised as breakfast. Number 10, blackberry preserves on biscuits. The berries were picked in summer, sometimes by children sent out with buckets and told not to come back until they were full. Thorns scratched arms and stained fingers purple for days. The berries went into a pot with sugar and cooked down until they thickened into a jam dark enough to look almost black. Poured into mason jars, sealed and stored on a shelf or in the cellar. By Saturday morning in November, a jar was opened and spooned onto a hot biscuit that had just come out of the oven. The preserves melted slightly into the bread, turning the inside of the biscuit purple. Nothing bought in a grocery store has ever come close, because what made it taste that way was not the recipe. It was the 6 months between the picking and the eating, the labor built into every jar. Number 9, cheese eggs. Eggs cracked into a bowl, beaten with a fork, and poured into a buttered skillet over low heat. As the curds began to form, slices of American cheese were folded in and stirred slowly until the cheese melted into the eggs, turning them creamy, yellow, and stretchy in a way that plain scrambled eggs could never manage. The secret was low heat and patience. High heat made the eggs rubbery and the cheese greasy. A grandmother who made cheese eggs stood at the stove and stirred the whole time, never walking away, never rushing the process. The result was a pile of soft golden curds, rich enough to eat with nothing else on the plate. Children asked for cheese eggs by name. It was the one breakfast they never had to be told twice to finish. Number 8, crackling bread. When a hog was slaughtered and the fat was rendered down into lard, the crispy bits left behind in the pot were the cracklings. Small, brown, uneven pieces of rendered pork skin and fat, crunchy, and intensely flavored. A grandmother saved those cracklings and folded them into a cornbread batter before pouring it into a hot, greased, cast iron skillet. The batter went into the oven and came out as a thick, golden cornbread studded with pork throughout. Every bite had a crunch where a crackling sat, a burst of salt and smoke and fat that interrupted the plain corn flavor and made it into something richer than cornbread had any business being. Crackling bread was Saturday morning food because it was an event. The cracklings had to be fresh, which meant somebody had rendered lard recently, which meant a hog had been processed, which meant the whole kitchen was running on a different rhythm than a normal week. The bread itself was not difficult. Cornmeal, salt, a little flour, an egg, buttermilk, and a generous handful of cracklings stirred in at the end. But the cracklings were the point, and they could not be bought at a store. They came from the yard, from the smokehouse, from a process that took all day and involved every adult in the household. A child who ate crackling bread was eating the end product of a chain of labor that started with a live animal and ended with a piece of cornbread that tasted like nothing else on the table. When the cracklings ran out, the bread went back to being plain cornbread, and everybody at the table knew the difference. Nobody says this part out loud, but it needs saying. The meals on this list were never meant to be nostalgic. They were born out of necessity, out of small budgets, limited choices, and the daily work of keeping people alive on whatever was available. A grandmother did not romanticize her Saturday morning cooking. She fed her family because that is what she did. The romance came later, after she was gone, when her grandchildren stood in modern kitchens with granite countertops and convection ovens and realized they could not make a single plate taste the way hers did. Not because they lacked the ingredients, because they lacked the decades, the thousands of repetitions, the hands that knew the skillet so well they could feel the temperature through the handle. That is what memory cooking really is. It is not talent, it is time. Number 7, hog jowl and eggs. The jowl was the cheek of the hog, cured in salt and smoke the same way ham was cured, but fattier, chewier, and stronger in flavor. Sliced thick and fried in a cast iron skillet over medium heat, it rendered out enough grease to cook everything else that morning. The slices came out with crispy edges and a soft, meaty center that tasted like bacon crossed with ham, only deeper and more complex. The eggs went into the same pan, into the jowl grease, and came out with a flavor that plain butter could never give them. The whites picked up the smoke, the yolks turned richer from the fat. A plate of hog jowl and eggs was simple in appearance, but layered in taste, because every element on the plate had been seasoned by the same piece of meat. Hog jowl was a cut that cost almost nothing because most shoppers did not want it. The cheek of the hog was considered scrap by anyone who had not grown up eating it. A grandmother knew better. She knew the jowl carried more flavor per pound than most cuts in the case, and she knew that the grease it left behind was currency in a kitchen where nothing went unused. On New Year's Day, hog jowl showed up alongside black-eyed peas for luck. But on a regular Saturday morning, it showed up because it was good, because it was cheap, and because a woman who had been cooking for decades knew exactly what that skillet needed before the first egg cracked. Number 6, rice cakes. Leftover white rice from the night before, mixed with a beaten egg and a pinch of salt, shaped into flat patties, and fried in a greased skillet until both sides turned golden and held together in one piece. They were firm on the outside, soft and slightly sticky on the inside, and served with syrup or alongside eggs and meat. Rice cakes were what happened when there was a pot of cold rice in the icebox and a grandmother who refused to throw food away. The egg held them together. The grease gave them a crust. The result was something that tasted better than the rice had the night before, which was the whole point. Nobody bought ingredients to make rice cakes. They existed because something else had already been cooked and a woman decided it was not finished yet. Number 5, salt mackerel. A whole side of mackerel, preserved in heavy salt, bought from the store, wrapped in brown paper. It had to be soaked in water overnight to draw the salt out enough to eat. By morning, it was still firm, still deeply flavored, and ready for the skillet. Dredged in flour or cornmeal and fried until the skin turned crispy. It was served whole on a plate with grits on the side. The bones were small and thin, and you learned to eat around them, or you learned the hard way. Salt mackerel was a breakfast fish in black households across the South long before anyone used the word brunch. It disappeared from most tables when fresh fish became easier to get, and the salted kind stopped showing up at the neighborhood store. But for a generation of grandmothers, Saturday morning without fried fish was a Saturday morning that had not really started yet. Number 4, scratch biscuits. Flour sifted into a bowl, log cut in with a fork or bare fingers until the mixture looked like coarse sand. Buttermilk poured in slowly, just enough, never too much. The dough was turned out onto a floured surface, folded twice, never more, and patted flat. Cut with the rim of a drinking glass, dipped in flour. Placed in a grease pan so close together they touched on the sides. Baked until the tops turned golden and the insides stayed soft and layered. Every grandmother's biscuits were different. The lard was different. The flour was different. The oven ran hot or cold or uneven. And yet they all came out right because she had adjusted for every flaw in that kitchen years ago and never had to think about it again. Biscuits from scratch were the foundation of Saturday morning. Everything else on the plate leaned against them. They were what the meal was built on, and the one thing nobody could teach you with words alone. Number 3, cold fried chicken from the icebox. The chicken had been fried Friday night. By Saturday morning, it sat in the icebox on a plate covered with wax paper, the crust slightly softened, the meat cold all the way through. A grandmother pulled it out, set it on the table, and that was breakfast. No reheating, cold fried chicken straight from the shelf, eaten with biscuits and whatever else was already on the table. The flavors had concentrated overnight. The salt and pepper in the crust tasted sharper cold. The meat was firmer, easier to eat with one hand. Cold fried chicken for breakfast was not a leftover, it was a plan. A grandmother fried extra on Friday for exactly this reason. She knew that Saturday morning would be full and the kitchen would be crowded, and not everything needed to come off the stove hot. Some of the best food on that table had been finished the day before. Number 2, grits. Not instant, not quick. Stone ground white corn grits, cooked low on the stove for 30 minutes or more, stirred with a long wooden spoon so the bottom did not catch and scorch. Water, a pinch of salt, and thyme. That was the recipe. When they were done, they were thick enough to hold a spoon upright and smooth enough to pour slow. A lump of butter went in at the table, pressed into the center and stirred until it melted into a golden pool. Some ate them with red-eyed gravy, the dark pan sauce made from ham drippings, and a splash of black coffee. Some ate them with cheese. Most ate them with butter and nothing else, because that was enough. Grits were the anchor of every plate on this list. They showed up under the eggs, beside the sausage, beneath the gravy. A Saturday morning without grits was not a Saturday morning. It was just a day. Number 1, the Saturday morning table itself. This is not a single dish. This is where all 24 came together. A table crowded with plates that did not match, glasses filled from a pitcher, chairs pulled in from the other room because there were always more people than seats. Everything on that table was cooked from memory by a woman who never wrote a recipe down in her life. She did not need to. Her hands knew, her eyes knew, the skillet knew, and when she sat down last, because she always sat down last, the table was already eating. That kitchen is quieter now. Some of those skillets sit in cabinets untouched. Some of those recipes left with her because nobody stood close enough, long enough to learn them. But the taste is still there, in the back of the mouth, in the part of the brain that holds Saturday mornings. It is still right there.
collard green omelet was a breakfast born from thrift and the habit of making yesterday's leftovers stretch. Collard greens, usually cooked long and slow with seasoning, were often tucked into eggs the next morning, creating a dish that was both frugal and flavorful. Families valued it because it made use of what they already had, ensuring nothing went to waste. The combination of tender greens with fluffy eggs gave a balance of nutrition and satisfaction. For children, it was a familiar flavor carried into a new form, while adults enjoyed the heartiness without requiring more expensive meat. It was a dish that tied breakfast to dinner, blending the rhythms of the household kitchen into one continuous cycle of reuse. Betty Crocker kitchens may have praised convenience, but African-American homes thrived on this kind of ingenuity. Collard green omelets are rare today, but they once carried the quiet wisdom of making much from little and starting mornings strong. Grits with cracklin' bits brought a satisfying crunch to the creamy comfort of stone-ground corn. Grits were simmered slowly with water and a pinch of salt until they reached a silky texture, then enriched with crispy pieces of pork cracklings that added both flavor and texture. The rich aroma of rendering pork fat filled the kitchen, signaling a breakfast that promised warmth and sustenance. Families loved this dish because it turned inexpensive corn and leftover pork into something memorable and deeply satisfying. Grandparents recall how the cracklings popped in the pan, a sound that always brought children running to the stove. Served in deep bowls with a pat of butter, these grits provided lasting energy for long mornings of work in the fields or at the mill. Each spoonful carried a mix of creamy corn and smoky crunch, a combination that reflected the resourcefulness and creativity of cooks who knew how to make every ingredient shine. Salmon croquettes with grits turned pantry staples into a breakfast feast that felt both luxurious and familiar across African-American communities of the 1970s. Canned salmon was flaked into a bowl with onions, breadcrumbs, and a little seasoning, then shaped into neat patties ready for the skillet. As they fried, the croquettes developed a crisp golden crust while staying moist inside, their aroma mingling with the gentle steam of creamy stone-ground grits bubbling nearby. This pairing brought together the coastal traditions of the South and the practicality of modern kitchens, where canned fish kept well and stretched to feed a family. Some cooks added a squeeze of lemon or a pinch of cayenne for extra brightness and heat, while others folded in fresh herbs from backyard gardens. Served with a side of sliced tomatoes or greens, salmon croquettes with grits delivered protein, comfort, and a taste of heritage, showing how everyday ingredients could be elevated into a soulful breakfast worth savoring. Cornmeal mush with sorghum syrup was a staple breakfast that reflected the creativity and resilience of African-American kitchens in the South and beyond. The mush itself was simple, made from cornmeal cooked slowly with water or milk until it thickened into a smooth porridge that filled bowls generously. On its own, it was filling but plain, so families would drizzle sorghum syrup over the top to add sweetness and richness without needing expensive sugar. Sorghum was cheaper, widely available in the South, and deeply tied to farm life, making it a household staple for generations of working families. This dish was eaten hot at the table with spoons, sometimes with butter or milk added, or cooled in pans and sliced to be fried later as griddle cakes. For children, it was a comfort food that brought both energy and warmth on school mornings when bellies needed to be full. For adults, it was a dependable way to stretch limited supplies into a hearty start to the day, ensuring no one went hungry. Cornmeal mush with sorghum syrup was never fancy, but it was practical, satisfying, and deeply tied to the rhythm of working life. Cathead biscuits with cane syrup earned their playful name from their impressive size, each biscuit as big as a cat's head. The dough was mixed by hand, using flour, lard, and buttermilk to create a texture both fluffy and sturdy enough to split and fill. Baked until golden brown, they emerged from the oven towering and fragrant. Grandparents remember serving them with thick drizzles of dark cane syrup or honey, a combination that balanced sweet and savory with every bite. These giant biscuits were a centerpiece of country breakfasts, capable of holding slices of fried ham or scrambled eggs without falling apart. Families loved how a single biscuit could satisfy even the hungriest farmhand, making them practical as well as indulgent. Their name sparked laughter and curiosity, ensuring they were always a conversation starter at the table. Today, the memory of Cathead biscuits remains a warm reminder of big flavors, generous hearts, and mornings filled with the smell of baking bread. Hot water cornbread patties delivered the satisfying crunch of cast iron frying to countless Delta kitchens, where cornmeal was as common as morning sun. Cooks stirred hot water into fine cornmeal until the mixture held together, then shaped it by hand and slid it into shimmering oil. The patties sizzled and crisped, forming a browned crust that gave way to a tender interior. The method required no milk or eggs, only the steady skill of a practiced hand, making it accessible and quick. Families ate these cornbread rounds with eggs, greens, or a simple drizzle of honey when sugar was scarce. In many homes, the sound of batter hitting hot oil signaled breakfast was ready, filling the air with the nutty aroma of toasting corn. Hot water cornbread patties celebrated resourcefulness and flavor, reminding everyone that the best dishes often came from the simplest combinations of grain, heat, and love, passed down through generations of African American cooks. Cane syrup biscuits were a breakfast treat that balanced simplicity with pure comfort. Biscuits were baked fresh, sometimes from scratch and sometimes from canned dough, then served with thick cane syrup poured generously over the top. The syrup was dark, sweet, and sticky, a regional staple that families could rely on when sugar and jams were too costly. The combination of flaky bread and syrup was both filling and indulgent, giving mornings a sense of celebration, even during lean times. For children, it was a sweet start to the day that felt like dessert, while adults valued it as quick fuel before work. Cane syrup itself was a treasured pantry item, often stored in large tins and used sparingly to stretch across weeks. Biscuits with cane syrup were not just food, but a reminder of family kitchens and the traditions that bound them together. Today, it is rarely seen, but it once carried both joy and survival in every bite. Catfish and grits gave weekend mornings a soulful edge, pairing crisp fried fish with creamy stone-ground grits in a combination that felt both rustic and celebratory. Fresh river catfish fillets were seasoned with salt, pepper, and a dusting of cornmeal before sliding into hot oil where they sizzled to a golden brown. The grits simmered slowly on the stove, enriched with butter and a touch of cream for a silky texture that balanced the crunch of the fish. Families often gathered around big skillets of catfish on Sundays after church, turning breakfast into a communal event. Some added a squeeze of lemon or a dash of hot sauce to brighten the flavors, while others served sliced tomatoes or greens on the side. Catfish and grits carried the heritage of Southern waterways and the ingenuity of African American cooks who transformed local catches into a beloved morning feast that satisfied hunger and celebrated the bounty of rivers and farms alike. Sweet potato coffee cake was a breakfast that carried warmth, thrift, and community in every slice. Families would mash leftover sweet potatoes into the batter, seasoning it with cinnamon, nutmeg, and sometimes cloves before baking it in heavy cast-iron pans that gave it a perfect crust. The result was moist and spiced, with a natural sweetness that came not from sugar, but from the potatoes themselves, making it both healthy and filling. It was often served at church gatherings or Sunday breakfasts when a little something special was needed on the table to bring people together. The dish reflected African American traditions of stretching what was available into something memorable, proving that nothing went to waste in kitchens where creativity was survival. Sweet potatoes were plentiful and affordable, making them an easy way to feed a family while also adding vitamins and nourishment to the meal. The cake was often paired with coffee, hot milk, or even molasses drinks, making it a centerpiece of mornings that were simple yet comforting. Though it is rarely baked today, this coffee cake once carried generations through hard times and sweet mornings alike, leaving memories of warmth, family, and resilience with every bite. Red-eye gravy with country ham was a bold wake-up call that combined salty meat drippings with the sharp bite of black coffee. After thick slices of cured ham were seared in a cast-iron skillet, a splash of hot coffee was poured into the pan to release every bit of smoky flavor. The result was a thin, savory gravy that was spooned over grits or biscuits, adding a punch of flavor that jolted sleepy mornings to life. This dish reflected a no-waste mindset, where nothing from a prized ham went unused. Grandparents remember the rich aroma of coffee mingling with sizzling pork as a smell that meant breakfast was nearly ready. Served alongside eggs or even spooned over rice, red-eye gravy gave working families the hearty start they needed for long days in the fields or factories. It was simple, strong, and unforgettable, a dish that carried the warmth of tradition and the energy of early morning labor. Buttermilk biscuits with cane syrup brought the warm fragrance of the Southern kitchen to every African-American breakfast table in the 1970s, where weekend mornings began with the sound of dough being patted and folded by hand. The biscuits rose tall and flaky as they baked in heavy pans, their buttery layers puffing into golden clouds. Cane syrup, boiled from freshly pressed sugarcane juice, added a deep, smoky sweetness that no ordinary syrup could match. Families kept jars of the thick amber syrup in the pantry, ready to drizzle over steaming biscuits straight from the oven. Some cooks stirred a little butter into the syrup for a glossy glaze, while others left it pure and strong to balance the biscuit's delicate crumb. This simple pairing carried memories of family farms, Sunday gatherings, and the strength of generations who turned humble ingredients into unforgettable flavor. Buttermilk biscuits with cane syrup proved that the simplest foods, treated with care, could turn an ordinary morning into a celebration of heritage and home. Hogshead hash was a breakfast that spoke to the no-waste mentality of African-American cooking traditions that valued resourcefulness and respect for food. When a hog was butchered, nothing was left unused, and the head provided meat that could be stewed, chopped, seasoned, and fried into hearty dishes. Families would mix the shredded meat with potatoes, onions, and sometimes peppers, then cook it together in a skillet until browned, crispy, and richly flavored. The flavor was intense, smoky, and savory, and it filled the house with a smell that lingered long after breakfast was finished. It was not just food, but a reminder of how creativity and resourcefulness made survival possible in communities where every scrap mattered. Children grew up eating it without complaint because it was hearty, flavorful, and kept them full through school, farm work, or chores. Adults relied on it as a way to honor the animal by using every part of it, ensuring nothing went to waste. Though hogshead hash has nearly vanished from today's kitchens, it once stood as a powerful symbol of resilience, thrift, and respect for tradition that sustained families. Fried ripe plantains brought a touch of Caribbean sweetness to Southern breakfasts, a flavor carried by migration and memory. Fully ripe plantains were sliced on the diagonal, their skins almost black to signal perfect sugar content. They were pan-fried in butter until their edges caramelized and their centers turned soft and custard-like. A sprinkle of brown sugar or a drizzle of cane syrup heightened the natural sweetness, making them irresistible alongside eggs or grits. Families cherished this dish for its tropical flair and the way it honored connections between African American and Caribbean kitchens. Grandparents recall how the scent of frying plantains would fill the house, a fragrance both exotic and familiar, tying generations to distant shores. Whether served alone as a treat or paired with savory dishes for contrast, fried ripe plantains turned an ordinary morning into something special. Their golden color and rich aroma still evoke memories of shared breakfasts and the enduring blend of cultures that shaped African American foodways. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy provided a bold, bracing start to the morning with a flavor that lingered long after breakfast was done. Thick slices of country-cured ham were seared in a heavy skillet until their edges browned and their fat rendered into a savory base. Into that sizzling pan went black coffee, which deglazed the salty bits and created a thin, smoky gravy. The sharp bitterness of coffee balanced the ham's rich saltiness, producing a sauce both surprising and addictive. Poured over warm biscuits or spooned onto grits, the gravy soaked in and carried a gentle caffeine kick that woke up the senses. Families across the South prized this dish for its simplicity and strength, a reminder of farm mornings when nothing went to waste. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy reflected the ingenuity of African American cooks who transformed pantry basics into something unforgettable. a breakfast that spoke of resilience and tradition with every deep, savory bite. Okra fritters were once a common breakfast food that made use of one of the most iconic crops in African American gardens. Fresh okra would be chopped, mixed with cornmeal and seasoning, and fried in small patties until golden brown. The result was crisp on the outside, tender on the inside, and full of earthy flavor that paired perfectly with hot coffee or milk. For families, okra fritters were both affordable and filling, using whatever the garden provided in abundance. They could be eaten plain with cane syrup or alongside eggs, making them versatile as well as practical. The dish reflected the deep agricultural roots of African American communities, where nothing grown went to waste. It was also a way of starting the day with something satisfying before long hours of labor. While okra remains popular in Southern cooking, the fritter form has faded from breakfast tables, leaving behind only the memory of mornings built on thrift and flavor. Molasses pulled bread brought a gentle sweetness to early mornings and delighted children who loved to tear off soft, sticky pieces while the loaf was still warm. The yeast dough was enriched with sorghum or blackstrap molasses, giving it a rich color and a deep, caramel-like flavor. After a slow rise, it was baked until the crust turned dark and slightly chewy, while the inside stayed moist and tender. Families treasured this bread because it required little more than patience and a steady hand, yet the reward was a fragrant loaf that could feed many. Grandparents remember how the scent of molasses would drift through the house, promising a breakfast that felt like a celebration even on an ordinary day. Slices were enjoyed plain, toasted or slathered with butter, making every bite a reminder of how sweet life could be when shared at the family table. Molasses pulled bread remains a symbol of care and time, proof that the simplest ingredients can create the most lasting memories. Sweet potato pancakes brought earthy sweetness and warm spice to kitchen tables, blending mashed sweet potatoes with cinnamon, nutmeg, and a splash of milk. The batter sizzled as it hit the griddle, releasing a fragrance that filled the room with comfort. Each cake browned to a gentle crisp outside while remaining moist and tender within, offering natural sweetness without the need for heavy syrup. Many families grew their own sweet potatoes, making these pancakes a natural way to use the harvest through cooler months. Some cooks stirred in chopped pecans for a nutty crunch, while others added a hint of ginger for extra warmth. Served with a dollop of butter or a drizzle of cane syrup, sweet potato pancakes became a Saturday morning favorite, reminding everyone of autumn fields and family traditions. This dish honored the African American love for root vegetables and the creativity of home cooks who turned humble ingredients into breakfast plates bursting with flavor and cultural memory.
25 breakfasts, no cookbooks, no measuring cups, no recipe cards, just a woman, a stove, and a lifetime of knowing. If you grew up eating at that table, you already know what was on it. Try making some crackling bread this weekend. Fry a piece of streak of lean in a hot skillet. Cook your grits for 30 minutes instead of 3. And if your grandmother is still here, go stand next to her while she does it. Watch her hands, ask her nothing. She will not give you the recipe in words. But if you pay attention long enough, she will give you something better. Drop the one dish from this list your grandmother made best. That is the real record. That is the cookbook that matters.